Welcome to Inspired Living with Marc and Kim. Every Wednesday, Marc and Kim, along with their special guests, will explore thought-provoking topics and ideas that promote creativity, self-help, healing, happiness, and well-being to inspire you on your spiritual journey. Each week, Marc and Kim will discuss different paths to achieving a more spiritual, balanced, happy, and healthy lifestyle. Topics will elevate consciousness and range from metaphysics to the human and social experience, and all things spiritual. Welcome to an inspired community that offers support, encouragement, and new ways of thinking. Marc and Kim are tested, certified, and professional spiritual mediums, metaphysical teachers, healers, and spiritual advisors with their own individual spiritual practices in Seattle, Washington, and Los Angeles, California. You are the inspired and the inspiration.
Ralph Waldo Emerson reminds us, whatever you do, you need courage. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be in this beautiful, amazing, peaceful planet of ours. This is Inspired Living Radio with Marc and Kim here on the OMTimes Radio Network. I am your host, Marc Lainhart, the Intuitive Prospector. I will be hosting solo today as Kim is still getting moved into California and finding a house. And if you want to work with Kim and any of the work that she's now doing in California back on the West Coast, you can visit her at lovefirst.info and just look up Kim Falcon, founder of Love First, and make sure to do an appointment with her. And she'll be back next week. Hopefully, she's been off for a few weeks just trying to get that cross-country move from Virginia to California taken care of. So have fun unpacking those boxes, Kim. So thanks so much for tuning in today. Today, we're going to be talking about how to honor your grief, something that's near and dear to my heart. And before we actually jump into the details of the show and who I am, I just want to take a second to pay tribute and honor to everybody that was impacted by the shootings, the horrible shootings, the 31 people that were murdered this weekend. And I know it's a lot more people from gun violence, but just somebody that has been impacted by a hate crime, losing my little brother to a hate crime through the use of a gun. I just want to just pay tribute and honor and just take a moment of silence to honor all the families and everybody that was impacted this weekend. And with that, just send your energy, your prayers, your healing thoughts for anybody that's involved and been impacted from hate crimes or a gun shooting or any just senseless violence. So, like I said, my name is Marc Lainhart, the Intuitive Prospector. I'm going to raise my energy up a little bit more just because it's we're talking today about how to honor your grief. And I'm going to just kind of share some of my backstory, things that I've worked on to honor my grief and understand what grief is and how to work through it, to actually understand it a little bit deeper, how to take grief's hand and how to befriend courage. And that's why I opened up the show today with what Ralph Waldo Emerson talked about, and that's whatever you do, you need courage. And that's for all of us, even when we're going through the grieving process of losing somebody. The families right now that are going through the grieving process, dealing with courage in El Paso and Dayton, Ohio. It's just a real world event going on right now, and it's a topic that I felt that needed to be talked about today. And so if you want to work with me, you can visit me here in Seattle, Washington, at marclainhart.com. You can internet search The Intuitive Prospector. You can catch me every Monday morning on my Facebook and YouTube channels, The Intuitive Prospector, where you can join almost 29,000 spiritual prospectors in search of their own spiritual gold. The show is called Metaphysical Mocha Mondays. It's every Monday morning at 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's a 30-minute inspirational show followed by the Prospecting Q&A after show, where I actually have a direct conversation with you through the YouTube channel, through my Instagram channel, and also my Facebook channel. And it's really been a lot of fun doing this the last 2 years because I've connected with so many amazing people. If you want to interact with the show today, right now, if you're catching the live broadcast, being broadcast all around the world with our inspired listeners who we adore and love, and if you want to interact with the show, I will be taking calls related to this topic. The number to call in is 1-202-570-7057. That is the OMTimes Radio call-in line. Chris, our producer, will put you into the waiting room when we have the right time to bring you on. If you do have a question about grief, mourning, dealing with the loss of a loved one, like I said, this last weekend, there's a lot of people right now that are in the grieving process. And I thought it would be a show that I could dedicate to those that need some spiritual guidance and healing. So if you want to interact with the show, you can also go to our Facebook page, which is Inspired Living Radio. It's on Facebook. Join the Inspired Listeners. I've got a community of about 1,200 listeners around the world, and you can post your question there if you don't want to call into the live show. You can also catch us over on Twitter and Instagram under Inspired for Us. That is the number 4. We also have encore shows. So this live podcast, or this live show, will go to podcast over on iTunes, YouTube, SoundCloud, Podbean, MarcLainhart.com. I have my favorite episodes listed there, lovefirst.info, and of course it's always located in the OMTimes radio archives. So make sure to check those out. We've been on the air for over 4 years now. This is we're heading into our 5th season of Inspired Living Radio, and we have a lot of different podcasts out there, close to getting up there to about 170 now, with amazing topics, wonderful guests, very inspiring, very educational, full of knowledge and wisdom. And again, thank you so much for hanging out with us. And this month, I want to give you our positive affirmation. And the positive affirmation is something that I came across as I was researching the Lion's Gate, which is tomorrow, and we'll talk about that in more detail during this show. But it's really something that I just thought about, and I thought I'd just share with you, and we're going to be using it all month. Again, this is the Inspired Living Radio positive affirmation, and it goes like this. I am not this hair. I am not this skin. I am the soul that lives within. So kind of a poem, if you will, but you can use it as a positive affirmation, because if you think about it, you really are not the hair. You really are not the skin. The skin grows, dies, and sheds. The hair grows, dies, and sheds, but the soul goes on after death. And so let me say that one more time, just kind of fun. I am not this hair. I am not this skin. I am the soul that lives within. So again, if you want to call in, the number to call in is 202-570-7057. This is Inspired Living Radio with Marc and Kim, and I'm your host, Marc Lainhart, the Intuitive Prospector, talking to you today about the courage it takes and the transformations to go through the grieving process, if you will. And I call it honoring your grief. For a long time, I didn't honor my own grief. And through my career, both professionally and personally, I was in the Coast Guard for 8 years, and I went to a lot of body recoveries. I was on an airplane recovery crash, 222 souls off the coast of Venezuela. So I did that for 8 years, seeing death and dying from a professional standpoint. And then as I got to be older, I said, with everything in life, we're all going to have the circle of life. We're all going to be faced with death, either from, our personal family, friend, colleague, fur baby, to our own death. I mean, because we're technically dying right now at the cellular level, because your cells grow every 5 to 7 years. Your cells grow and die off. And so every 5 to 7 years, you're literally a cellular new person, and then we call that aging. So, but as far as the grieving process, a lot of my professional career, I just didn't really think about it, because you had a job to do, and they trained you to do that, right, to not be focused in on so much of the grieving aspect, but, the life-saving aspect and the critical thinking and the logic that goes with that. And then after my grandma moved into the spirit world, I was actually with her when she passed. That was my first personal experience of true loss for me, because I was very connected to my grandma. And I had other family members move into the spirit world, but I just wasn't as close. But the beautiful yet painful thing about being with my grandma during her transition is I was holding her hand, and then I was brushing her hair, and literally watched her spirit leave her body. I watched the energy in her eyes fade to black, and read Psalm 23, just from my upbringing as a Catholic, and something that I just didn't know what to do in that moment. So I just read to something that I was taught as far as what I had learned in religion. And I'll be talking a little bit about that as far as conditioning and things that we turn to when we are going through the grieving process a little bit later in the show. But again, I will be opening up the phone lines in the second half here. We're going to be going to our first commercial here in just a few minutes. But if you have a question, If you want to chat, the number to call in is 202-570-7057, or post a question on our closed Facebook page, which I will be monitoring right now. If you have something that you want, just a question about, the difference between grief, what is mourning different? How is mourning and grief, how are they different? I'm going to be just, kind of sharing just some of those differences. But as far as, how I got into the work that I do, even just being on the radio show today, hearing my voice and talking to you through the airwaves, it does come back to that personal experience of losing somebody and watching my grandma move into the spirit world. And so after the professional, awareness and experiences of seeing, people, being called to other people's tragedies and watching other people move into the spirit world, it really started to dawn on me that, there is life after death. There is something more than just this physical flesh suit working a 9-to-5 job to pay your bills and your taxes just so you can die. That's kind of where the pivot point, the epiphany or the paradigm shift really started to take place. And then you add my own near-death experience, something that I recalled from my early childhood, to a out-of-body experience in a river accident, and, of course, the tragic passing of both of my brothers. And again, at the opening of the show, I talked about my little brother that was murdered in a hate crime, included racism, included senseless violence, and very young, 21 years of age, taken from the physical world by somebody else's free will and choice, and moved into the spirit world. And then 3 days later, my older brother was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer, and my father-in-law was passing away from multiple sclerosis, all the young ages of 21, 35, 47. My age, actually, right now, I'm 47. So it's kind of just mindful to be like, wow, where's the time gone? But those tragedies, those traumas, those tragic events really started to rewire my internal belief system, my own thoughts, how I looked at heaven. I started to question, where is heaven? Heaven is up, hell is down, as I was taught. But then I realized we live on a round planet. There is no up or down. So that didn't make sense. And then I started to, look at the spirit world and how the spirit world very much interacts with us on a daily basis, very much like the wind. We see the effects of the wind on the trees, but we don't see the wind with our eyes. And so for me, it started to become this prospecting journey, if you will, of understanding death, dying, mourning, grieving, the loss of, what does happen to the soul when we leave this body. And it took me to England. It took me to a college to study mediumship and psychic sciences and awareness and spiritual healing. And that is the whole reason you're hearing my voice today, is because of those not professional tragedies that I was called to with strangers, but the personal tragedies and deaths and experiences that I have now experienced over and over again. And what I wanted to do was start, after I went through my own healing and my own transformations and my own self-discovery of prospecting, that is where the Intuitive Prospector concept was born, and is now my spiritual practice here in Seattle, helping people spiritually prospect for their own spiritual goal, because I found that everybody is different when it comes to this topic of death and dying. I've worked with people that are complete skeptics. I've worked with people that are full atheists that have no belief of life after death. I've worked with agnostics, people that want proof of life after death. And I've worked with true believers that have had their own experiences. And that's what it comes down to. One of the things I like to say, after this great transformation and starting to honoring my grief and not hiding from it, because as guys, for you guys listening out there, we're taught not to necessarily show vulnerability. We're not necessarily taught, now I can't say that for today's generation, but my generation in the 70s was to not show weakness, vulnerability. Don't be a coward. Don't have this label of being, a wimp. And honoring your grief actually takes great strength. It takes great courage, and being open and expressing that is a very big part of honoring your grief. And we're going to be talking about that after our first break here. But one of the transformations that took place is I was once a student of extreme loss and tragedy. Now I'm a teacher of hope and healing, and it's through the expression of my own grief, seeking a counselor out, honoring my grief, expressing my grief, writing about my grief, even just sharing this on today's show that's a broadcast around the world. I don't know how many listeners, but if it hits the ears of one person and it makes a difference in that one person's life, then that's what this is all about. So that's why I'm here. And again, I just want to thank you for hanging out today on Inspired Living Radio. This is the live broadcast. And again, you can catch the podcast that'll be streaming over on iTunes and YouTube and SoundCloud, Podbean, OMTimes Radio Archives. And make sure to take a listen to it, download it. And again, if you want to work with me, I'm here in Seattle, Washington. My name is Marc Lainhart, the Intuitive Prospector. You can go to marclainhart.com, just internet search the Intuitive Prospector, and I would be honored and humbled to work with you and help you spiritually prospect for your own spiritual goal. And if you want to start calling in, we're going to open up the phone lines. If you have a question on grief, mourning, how to honor that, how to work through that. If there's no callers, then I'll just continue on with the topics that I'm going to be covering about how to deal with this. So it's really up to you. And again, if you want to post a question, if you don't want to call in, if you're nervous or you don't want to talk on the phone with me, no problem. You can post on our closed Facebook page, Inspired Living Radio, and I'll be answering those questions or taking them right from the Facebook page. So again, the number to call in, 202-570-7057, and make sure to get on our Facebook page. We got an interactive map at the top of the page where you can let us know where you're from, what city, post a picture of you, picture of your lovely city where you're listening from. Like I said, we're a growing community of inspired listeners all around the world, and we just want to say thank you so much for tuning into today's show where we are talking about honoring our grief. And again, the Inspired Living affirmation for this month is, I am not this hair, I am not this skin, I am the soul that lives within. And we're going to be going to our first break here, and we'll be back here in 2 minutes of Inspired Living Radio, where we like to say, you are the inspired, and you are the inspiration.
The future of Internet radio is here. OMTimes Radio, IOM FM. Host your show on IOM FM, the radio network of OMTimes Media, one of the more recognized brand names in the conscious community, and is backed by the extensive marketing reach of OMTimes. Hosting a show on IOM FM immediately connects you with our extensive dedicated community. Are you seeking answers to life questions? Would you like to connect to a departed loved one? Are you suffering from pain, stress, or anxiety? Kimberly Thalkin is a tested, certified, and professional psychic, spiritual medium, energy healer, hypnotherapist, and the founder of Love First, where life transformations happen. Love First services support, guide, and empower individuals by connecting them to their highest potential to live a healthier, joyful, and meaningful life that's filled with purpose. All services can be done by phone, Skype, or in person in Encino, California. Please visit lovefirst.info. That's LOVEFIRST.info for more information.
For those times when you're looking for insight and additional tools to living your most elevated life, there's no better place to turn than Intuitive Alchemy Radio. Join me, Laura Brown, each Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern for inspiring conversations, live on-the-air readings, and tools to help you build your most aligned, most abundant, and most delicious life.
Death Row Dogs Rescue is a 100% all-volunteer, no-kill rescue 501c3 nonprofit organization. We are run solely by volunteers who dedicate their time and resources for the past 30 years to rescuing homeless pets from the streets in Los Angeles and surrounding areas, and from city and county animal shelters who are on death row, often moments away from being euthanized. We provide housing, medical care, and training to these neglected, abused, and often severely injured animals. Donate now, save a life, and allow these beautiful dogs to experience a home life filled with love. All donations are greatly appreciated and are tax deductible. Please visit www.deathrowdogsrescue.com to see some of our amazing dogs who need homes. Do not breed or buy. Make adoption your first option.
And welcome back to Inspired Living Radio. I am your host, Marc Lainhart, the Intuitive Prospector, talking today about how to honor our grief. And I opened up the show with a quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson that reminds us, whatever you do, you need courage. And that includes honoring your own grief, honoring the mourning that you're going through. And it does take a lot of courage because there's a lot of unfoldment and transformation and awarenesses and awakenings that take place. There was a commercial playing that talked about the alchemy process, the actual chemical makeup, and I'm going to be talking about how that impacts even at your cellular level the grief and trauma that you go through, whether it's from losing a loved one or just having a traumatic experience. It just ranges, and it does hold at the cellular level, and I'll be talking about that. But again, if you want to interact with the show right now, the number to call is 202-570-7057. If you have a question about grief, if you are going through the grieving process, if you want to just honor your grief and just, give me a call and talk about it, I'm going to be opening the phone lines. This is something that Kim and I, moving forward, for the second half of this year, something we've had a meeting on. Kim's off today. She's getting moved back to California. She's hopefully going to be on the air with me next week. But we're going to be having more open conversations and dialogues based on topics, doing free readings, of course, and open phone lines, but just giving an interaction with our inspired listeners to maybe call in and express what's going on, how they're feeling, and maybe get some insight or spiritual guidance. But we're going to just be doing a little bit more of that, along with some fantastic interviews and guests already scheduled coming up in the months ahead. So again, if you want to check out our Facebook page, just go look for Inspired Living Radio, and that's another way that you can post your question, or follow us on Twitter or Instagram under Inspired For Us. That is the number 4. If you do want to work with Kim, you can find her at lovefirst.info. Now back in Encino, California. All right, so let's talk about loss. Let's talk about, I kind of shared my journey of the traumas and the tragedies that I've gone through, as far as my brothers, my grandma, my father-in-law, my own real father, and just kind of giving you, what my experience has really been since 1993, since I joined the Coast Guard in 92, I guess, is when I joined delayed entry. So went to boot camp in 93. But since 1993, I've been given a front row seat to what society would call death and dying. Now, for the first half of my career, I didn't really get into the feelings and the emotions of death because I had a job to do. I was a first responder, and we just had a great show on just a few weeks ago talking about first responders and PTSD, and even our veterans suffering from PTSD. If you've been called into action or some sort of military conflict, or the coasties that are out there every single day, 24/7, 365, that are protecting our borders and our waterways and rescuing lives and saving ships. I mean, the Coast Guard does a lot, and is probably right up there with the police departments and the fire departments and all the first responders that are called to tragedies every single day that we are here on this planet. Every single day, no matter what hour, somebody's being called to another person's tragedy to help, to assist, to pull them out of a situation. And over time, at the cellular level, at the psychology levels, it does impact. And so we for myself, I looked at death as more of a job, but now with the work I do and allowing the emotions and the feelings to move in, I'm even 20 years later going through changes at the cellular level, very similar to, if you're familiar with Pavlov's dog, where the Russian scientists mistakenly uncovered unconditioned stimulus responses. And grieving and going through the grieving process is going to do that to you at the cellular level, at the heart level, at the mind level, at the body level. And it's, if you know the story, it's from the early 1900s. It's where he would ring a bell, and then the bell that served food, and the dog would salivate. once he'd ring the bell but not serve food, the dog would salivate. So there's a conditioned response that can take place, and that's pretty much what I'm going through right now, years later. Even though I love what I do, I don't have a stressful job. When I hear a fire truck, or if I see the situations that have unfolded in El Paso and Dayton with the mass murdering and the mass shootings, I respond like Pavlov's dog to that, like a dog salivating, whether it's an alarm. And I never really thought about that until I started sitting down with my naturopath doctor. Western medicine didn't work for me, and so I switched over to the ND, the naturopath doctors. And she said, you know, a lot of what you're dealing with in your own healing later on with your body is because you're in still response to the first half of your life of being called other people's traumas and tragedies and being a first responder. So it's something I'm going to be working on as we move into later this year and into 2020, working with our first responders, working with veterans, talking about PTSD, and it's okay to have post-traumatic stress disorder, and acknowledge that and let it, you know, work through you and express that, because that's part of releasing and not holding on. Because when you hold on to stuff from a metaphysical standpoint, from an energetic standpoint, if you hold on to that, it becomes dis-ease, also known as disease. And it could be weight gain, it could be high blood pressure. For me, it's the cholesterol response. For me, it's the trilipidemia in my blood. This is trying to uncondition what I've been taught to learn all over those years. And the spiritual pathway, the alchemy process, the alchemy transformation started all several years ago, over 20 years ago, when my brothers had moved into the spirit world. It's been almost 20 years. And so, you know, we can be conditioned, and that's what Pavlov discovered. You know, like I said, I don't think he meant to do that. He just came across this response and went, okay, there is a thing known as, a responsive conditioning to our external environment and our relationships that impacts our internal response. So if you're familiar with that, great. If not, just look up Pavlov's dogs. It's a simple article. It's based on psychology, but it really does talk. It's called the Pavlovian conditioning, aka classical conditioning. And like I said, he discovered it accidentally back in the 1890s, and then started to really push that forward with doing more tests in the early 1900s. And it's quite interesting because humans are very much the same way, and how we respond. You know, loss brings, I have found, uninvited pain into our lives. I picked up the phone when I was 27 and got the news that my brother had been murdered. I go over to, pay tribute and honor and do what I can in the situation, only to find out my older brother is going to die from brain cancer. So it was a lot to take on, and it wasn't pain that I invited into my life, trust me. But it's nonetheless, it's the loss that we have all suffered, and we've all gone through pain. We've all lost. It's the attitude of how you start to deal with that. Do you want to lock it away? Do you want to hold on to it? Or do you want to, express it, let it move through you, and honor those that have moved into the spirit world, living the best life that you can, carpe diem, if you will, seizing the day, not living in the past, not living in the future, but finding the magic in the moment is what I teach on. And it's something that it really, I didn't know I'd be doing this work, 20 years later, but it is a big part of my journey. And I found in doing this work that a lot of people would not honor their grief. They would tuck it away. They would, especially guys. Guys are really bad. Not so much women. Women are really good about, getting in touch with their emotions and their feelings because they've been doing it their entire lives. Some of us guys have been conditioned not to be, especially if you're a first responder, especially if you're a police officer, especially if you're a firefighter, in work that is demanding. It's the environment of conditioning of, you don't need to be in touch with your feelings and emotions. You just need to do your damn job. And then over time, we find later in life that a lot of these first responders and veterans and police officers have a lot of psychology problems and health problems as well. So by expressing it, by honoring it, you're actually improving what your body's response is going to be, but you're not also conditioning and holding on and keeping that in. Because like I said, loss, it's uninvited pain that's going to come into your life at some point or another. It came into mine in a big way. And, people would always say to me, Mark, it's going to heal over time. And it does, but it never leaves you. I don't know where, people are under the impression that this loss will leave you. It sticks with you forever, and it actually becomes a part of you. And if you acknowledge that and you accept that, you realize you start to grow around that loss, knowing that loss is not going to leave you, it's a now part of you. And when you honor that, but again, in the United States, we're really not great about expressing our grieving process. We don't go sit in, when we bury somebody, that's the last time, we go to the graveyard for years. I try to stop by the graveyard every year to honor my brothers and to say hi. And they're not there. They're very much part of the world within a world of the etheric, just a higher vibration world is what I've come to understand in my studies. But it's just a way to pay tribute and to honor them and celebrate that there is life after death. The culture of Mexico, in Asia, in Mexico, down south, they honor their day. They have a Day of the Dead, and they honor their dead, and they go have picnics and put up pictures and celebrate with food and wine and drink and really honor the dead. And for some reason, in the United States, we just don't seem to do that. So it's just kind of been an interesting thing to study and to observe and to watch. But again, when that loss comes into our lives, it's not invited. In the opening of the presence of pain of your loss, it's acknowledging the inevitability of the pain and being willing to gently embrace the pain. That is the courage that I'm talking about. That's the courage that Ralph Waldo Emerson talked about. Whatever you do, you need courage. And that's in the grieving process as well. It's you demonstrate the courage to honor your pain. And that's what today's show is about. It's about honoring your grief. It's about honoring your pain. It's about honoring and living for those that are no longer here. I always like to remind people that getting old is a privilege because it's something denied to many. And I just even on my Metaphysical Mocha Monday show every Monday morning on Facebook and YouTube, I talked about the average amount of people that move into the spirit world every single day. And on average, it's about 151,000 people around the world from accidents to stroke to cardiac to mass shootings to sickness to suicide. On average, it's about 151,000 people around the world that move into the spirit world every single day. And it averages about one out of 1,000 people, it's about 8 per 1,000 people in a population base. So if you think about that, there's a lot of people. Now, there's also 350,000 plus people coming into the world on a daily average. So it's literally 2 to 1. We have more people coming in than we have people going out. But it just shows you that is if we look at numbers as a numerologist, I look at that as a fascinating statistic, something that we don't even think about really until you actually hear it like on Inspired Living Radio. And you go, wow, 151,000 coming out of the planet and 350,000 coming into the planet. And when you realize that, that's just the circle of life. It makes you really ponder and wonder about reincarnation, about coming back, about karma, when you start to look at those numbers. But when you go through this pain and this loss, and you will, it's guaranteed to everybody. It's death and taxes, the only 2 guarantees in life. You may have heard that saying. It's really how you embrace the pain, how you embrace the trauma, how you embrace the loss, and to move into honoring your pain, to honoring your transformation, to honoring the alchemy process at the cellular level that changes because of great loss and trauma and tragedies. And it's your ability to demonstrate the courage to move into that, acknowledge it, express it, and let it pass through you, knowing that it will never leave you. It'll be a big part of you now. I find that one of the things that when I was going through the journey of really bad depression, anxiety, trying to find the good in the day, asking the question, why do bad things happen to good people? Why did my family deserve this horrible tragedy? And I don't know, it just didn't end with my brother's murder. We had 5 murder trials that we had to go through. I had to face and sit across from my brother's killer and ask, why did you do this? And then, of course, watching 5 other people convicted, who one is still in jail to this day and will be in jail for another 15 years. So, going through that just kept reliving this nightmare, and then watching my older brother fade away and leave his family behind at the young age of 33 from brain cancer. It was very, it was a very difficult time in my life, and definitely something I didn't express. And I didn't honor my grief because sometimes you don't have time to honor your grief in that moment. It's the days and weeks and months and years after that really where it impacts you. Not at that moment. It's kind of a blur. Kind of time slows down. For those of you that have lost loved ones or have gone through the loss or tragedy I'm talking about, you know exactly what I'm talking about. With time, just your memory's a little faded, a little blacked out. You're having a hard time recalling, and time just seems to be irrelevant. But it's the years after, and that's what I remind people, that, it's not during the moment, it's after the moment. And I just had a friend, last year commit suicide here in Seattle, and it really tore a lot of us apart, because it just came out of the blue and it wasn't expected. And I knew, and I told, some of my friends and people that knew her, that it's going to be the year after, a few years after, because suicide, there's no answers. Especially when they don't leave any kind of information behind of why they did that. And it's the years after and the months after that really impact you. Certain moments, certain memories, certain songs, certain books, certain shows, certain movies can really trigger that Pavlov's dog that I'm talking about, that salvation, like the dog salivating, waiting for the food when the bell's rung. That can be your bell being rung, and it can trigger, cortisone. It can trigger hormones in the body that causes, different responses, whether it's depression, anxiety, not wanting to be social, being around people. And it's where that's the courage to step in and say, I need to honor this. I need to honor her and her life. Her free will and choice to take her own life was her choice. I can't live there. I can just honor her and have the best memories I can about her, honor my grief, honor my trauma that I've taken on with this. And this goes for everybody. And that's what Ralph Waldo Emerson was talking about. Whatever you do, you need courage. And that's including when it comes to grief, when it comes to death and dying, when it comes to mourning. So we're going to go to our break. And when we come back, I'm going to talk about the difference between grieving and mourning, what grief is and what mourning is. And if you want to call in and have a quick chat, number to call, 202-570-7057. This is Inspired Living Radio. We'll be right back.
The cutting edge of conscious radio, OMTimes Radio, IOM FM.
Have you wondered how to change your love paradigm? The secret key is finding a love partnership, not just a regular connection. How do you find these? Through conscious relationships. Ascending Hearts Dating is a dating site for people like you that believes in second chances and a different type of spiritual connection. Try Ascending Hearts for free at ascendinghearts.com and change your love paradigm. Ascending Hearts, the premier dating community for the spiritually awake.
One planet, 7.3 billion people, only one you. Life offers us many opportunities and learning experiences. Are you ready to explore and discover this beautiful planet, the life and energy all around us, the spiritual world, and what is unseen, along with your own personal soul adventure? Marc Lainhart, the Intuitive Prospector, is the spiritual connection you have been prospecting for. Internationally known as a tested and professional clairvoyant medium and spiritual advisor, Marc's work as a metaphysical teacher, medical instructor, radio show host, inspirational writer, and hiking guide are here to help you on a journey of self-discovery, healing, inspiration, education, and a whole lot of spiritual awesomeness. Dare to dream. Dare to explore. Dare to live. For more information on Marc's spiritual practice in Seattle, Washington, please visit marclainhart.com or internet search The Intuitive Prospector.
My name is Victor Furman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio, and we'll explore these topics and so much more on Destination Unlimited.
Opiates has taken everything and everyone I've ever loved away from me. Everything.
I blew my ankle out and I got prescribed pain pills by my doctor.
If making my detox public is going to help somebody, I'm all for it. So I just wish I would have had a warning.
Opioid dependence can happen after just 5 days. Know the truth, spread the truth. A message from Truth, the Ad Council, and ONDCP.
and welcome back to Inspired Living Radio with Marc and Kim. I am your host, Marc Lainhart, talking today about how to honor your grief, how to deal with grief, how to deal with loss, how to deal with trauma and tragedy, the different things that take place from the metaphysical standpoint, the cellular standpoint, the alchemy changes that take place, the mindset, your words, your thoughts, how death impacts all of us. And today I want to talk about going over some tips that might help you to honor yourself and your loved ones, to help move that energy through you without holding on to it, knowing that you will have your moments, you will have your trigger moments, or what I call very similar to Pavlov's dog response, like a dog salivating when a bell is rung, known also as, classical conditioning from our external environments, where we have things in our external environment that triggers that bell ringing, and it triggers a response, dog salivating, so we respond with our hormones. But it's really, it's an association of stimulus that brings about a particular response, and not everything that we respond to that we see with our own eyes. There's an internal response that takes place at the cellular level with the hormones, the chemicals, the imbalances that can take place, and it's a very interesting hard at times journey of going through grief. Like I said, loss brings in uninvited pain into our lives, and it's about the courage to honor that pain, to acknowledge that pain, to embrace that pain. I believe it was Rumi that talked about the cure for the pain is the pain. And when we demonstrate the courage to honor our pain, to honor our grief, to honor our sorrow, it is okay to do that, men and women alike, especially men, because we're really, part of our conditioning is not to necessarily have feelings and expressions and emotions that would show a vulnerability or a sensitivity, when actually I find it's quite the opposite, and quite true that it's quite strong and heroic and brave to honor your grief. So before the commercial, I was talking about, some of you might be asking, what is the difference between grieving and mourning? And I, in my studies and in my counseling and my, even my own transformations, I found that grief for me is kind of the constellation of internal thoughts and feelings we have when we love someone who dies. So I'll say that again. Grief is the constellation of our internal thoughts and feelings and emotions when we have someone we love that's died and has left our physical presence and has moved into what I call the etheric world, the spiritual world, the afterlife, Summerland, heaven, just a different frequency, still but very much energy. And I always go back to Nikola Tesla on this one. If you want to unlock the secrets of the universe, you think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration, not the physical flesh suit and the skin. And just it was very much in line with the poem that I opened up the show with, is I'm not this hair, I'm not this skin, I'm the soul that lives within, because the skin dies off, the hair dies off every single day, but your soul is going to live on. It lives within, and eventually it's going to be set free and return back to source. And so for me, my understanding of grief is really just more of that internal process of what we're processing. And then mourning is when you take that grief that you have inside you and you express it outside of you. So however you want to express, whether it's writing, whether it's doing a show, this would be a form of expression, I guess. I just thought about that. This show of Honoring Grief is my way of expressing and honoring my own trauma and tragedies and grieving for my brothers, for my father-in-law, for my dad, for my fur babies, for a lot of family and friends and colleagues I've lost along the way, and honoring them by expressing myself. And that's what mourning is when you take that grief that's inside you and you express it however you want to do that. Maybe it's directing a movie, maybe it's writing a song, maybe it's doing a play, maybe it's doing some artwork. That's a great way to express it outside of yourself, because we do really respond, just like Pavlov's dog. Our response, our internal responses, whether consciously or unconsciously at the cellular level, can have a stimulus response based on what's happening to us externally. For example, the full moon, when that takes place, we know that the moon itself, from a physics and universal law, that gravity of the moon impacts the tides, the oceans. And if it's pretty strong to move oceans and create waves, and if you've ever been in the ocean, been hit by a wave and felt that power of gravity and the moon's gravitational pull on the earth, you know that as human beings, we need water. We can only go 3 days without water, and then we die. So that water that's in us, whether it's, some would say it's 65%, some would say it's 75%. I just know that I can't go more than 3 days without water. So water is a vital element, and if the moon can move the oceans, it's got to have some sort of pull on us. And so that is an example of your external environment having an impact on your internal environment. And just for the sake of time, and you can go look at the stats. Farmer's Almanac's been tracking full moons for a long time, over 150 years. And even in emergency medicine, they track full moon cycles because they've shown in stats and in studies that the pregnancy or the births increase, the motor vehicle accidents increase, the fights increase, emergencies increase, call loads increase all around the world, not just here in the United States, but all around the world. And so with those trends, you start to see that there are patterns of how the external environment has a direct impact on your internal environment. Now it's up to you. Now it's how you process this. How do you handle the grieving that's inside you, the emotions, the feelings, the thoughts, the self-sabotage, the whys, especially if it's around suicide, guys, because there's so many unanswered questions. And could I have done a better job? Could I have said something? And that internal grieving is now how do you express that to move into the morning is how you express and release and let it transfer through you without holding on to it and still honoring and paying tribute to that pain and honoring that pain because the pain heals the pain. And I remember Rumi talking about that. But today I'm just sharing my journey, my soul adventures as a first responder, as a retired firefighter, as someone who worked in being called to other people's tragedies for the first half of my life, and how not honoring your grief can actually, be detrimental to your health, to your mindset. A lot of people have taken their own lives. A lot of first responders and veterans that I know personally have passed in the spirit world because they haven't dealt with the process of honoring the loss and expressing that, the grieving in the mourning. Death is not the opposite of death is not the opposite of life, but it's a part of it. And when we start to look at it that way, that it is just a part of life, and I gave numbers earlier in the show of 151,000 people plus on average every single day move into the spirit world, and 350,000 plus people come into the world. You see that's a lot of numbers coming in, going out. And I even remember when I started this show, maybe my promo for the Intuitive Prospector on Inspired Living Radio 4 years ago, I think I said there was 7.3 billion people and only one you. You may have heard that in the commercial break. I believe now on the Worldometer, we're up to 7.7 billion. So just in those 4 years, we've gone from 7.3 billion to 7.7 billion. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of, changing. So let's start with how can we work at the remaining of the show here. How can we work through this pain? How can we take grief by the hand? How can we befriend courage? What is courage? How do you define courage? There's definitely different images of bravery that might come to your mind, whether it's I think of Star Wars, Jedis, or knights on horsebacks, or firefighters risking their lives, first responders. Bravery tends to be loud and boisterous, and courage is often quite soft and quiet. And that's why I know everybody can work through this with courage, because you're not out there being loud and boisterous. You're working through your own stuff. Whatever you do, you need courage. That's what Ralph Waldo Emerson reminded us of. And befriending courage and, just develop that relationship of courage and, taking the experience by the hand, whether it's grief, whether it's loss, whether it's trauma, and acknowledging that you are going through this, that the grieving process is the internal struggle. The mourning is how you express that out and move that from the darkness towards the light. And one of the quotes that came to my mind was from Buddha. The trouble is you think you have time. And, time is what you make of it today, the magic in the moment. I remember Queen Elizabeth saying, grief is the price we pay to love. So, there's that saying, love hard, love much, laugh often. And, when you have your relationships, whether it's with a person, whether it's with your animals, whether it's with yourself, it's part of the price of loving and being connected in the physical plane. It's the price we pay. It's through the power of grief. But how you honor that grief and move that through the process of mourning and expressing yourself, it's quite a transformation. It's quite an alchemy. But grief, in my experience, is two parts. The first is the loss. The second is the remaking of life, and that's where I'm at today. This is a remaking of my life by honoring my grief, by being here today to say it's a strength, and it takes courage to honor your grief and to work through it and acknowledge it and be a part of that. As far as one of the things I want to give you to honor, to help you today, to honor your grief, is just to take a moment. Like I said, it's not the moments of the time that is really going to impact you. It will, but it's the moments after, the feelings of, the chaos, the loss, the whatever your experience. It usually is after the moment that it really starts to take on its effects of that Pavlov's dog's response that I'm talking about, that salvation, that cellular response, the stimuli to the external environments and the reminders. So take a moment. Take a moment just to sit and to honor and to process a fresh new start, that you are remaking your life. You're living right now for those that are no longer living, to carpe diem, to really seize the day. Another thing that I would recommend is to honor their memory. Like a lot of times we just tuck it away, and then that's going to come back to bite you, whether it's a year, 30 years, 40 years, it will come back if you just tuck it away and you don't honor the memory of your friends and family and fur babies. And, honor their memory, honor who they were, continue to talk to them. There's daily tips that I offer through the Alexa app and the Echo app. Just ask to open up Positive Living, and you'll get a spiritual daily tip. You'll actually hear my voice, like you're hearing my voice right now. You'll hear my voice about how to pay attention to the signs, symbols, synergy, and synchronistic events of the unseen world that is interacting with our world right now, every single minute, just like the wind interacts with the planet. We just see the effects of the wind. We don't actually see the wind with the physical eye. The spirit, etheric world, the unseen world is very much that same way. And when you honor them and you talk to them, that's also a form of expression to honor your own grieving by releasing that internally, and mourning by expressing it, by talking and honoring their memory. For you guys out there, you don't need to do it alone. There's counseling sessions, there's counselors, there's men's groups, there's Facebook groups. The technology is there. You don't have to do it alone. And that's something I'm going to be working with. Our guest that was just on the show, Alfred, he is doing a lot more of this work about PTSD with veterans and first responders. And I'm actually going to be an example of what that looks like, and do some lectures and be a guest speaker on his seminars. And so you don't need to do it alone. You don't need to, hold on to those memories alone. You can express those memories and share those memories as well. I'd say also take care of yourself. Good sleep, rest, diet, watch what you're eating, because there is a response later in life that will impact you. And by taking good care of yourself, it's disease, because something is off that's allowing the body not to function as it should. And keep track of your decisions, especially months after some sort of tragedy or trauma. We find that people go into this fog. They go into even just questioning their own life, their own legacy, and what that looks like. And so keep track and maybe take notes, keep track of your decisions, because you may respond, just take it from someone who knows, you may respond defensively, or you may respond oversensitively because of what your transformation is going on. It has nothing to do with that person. It's all about you. The process really does begin with you, and it's that healing. So keep track of your decisions that you're making and your responses, because when you're in the grieving process, that can have a big part of not honoring your grief because you're holding it in. And last but not least, before we end the show, I just want to talk about stages of deprogramming. And for survivors, this weekend was a big trigger for me because I lost my brother to a hate crime, a senseless crime with a handgun, shot execution style 5 times. How horrific. But I honor his legacy. I honor who he is, and I express that today, just like I'm doing in the show. And the stages of programming, when we have that loss or that hurt, we have that shock and that numbness. That's the beginning of the stages. And I always like to remind people that shaking does cause an awakening. And then we go into our emotional responses of grieving. That internal response could be denial. It could be emotional outbursts. It could be anger. It could be fear. It could be not wanting to live anymore. And then when we start to move into mourning and honoring our grief and honoring those that are no longer with us and honoring trying to make the place better and leave it better than how we found it, we start searching. We start what I've found to be what I call prospecting, spiritual prospecting for your own spiritual goal. And we start to disorganize some of our relationships, our lives. And then we kind of get into a little bit of panic and a little bit of, well, should I be doing this? And then there might be some guilt or some isolation or some loneliness. But once you're past all this, everything's on the upswing. Everything starts to go. We may still have some depression or some reentry troubles or some triggers, that bell ringing, that salvation I was talking about, salvating dog when the bell's rung. We may have those trigger moments, but it's going to continue on. It's going to get better. And when you honor your grief and when you step into that, you start to find new relationships, new strengths, new patterns. You start to have hope. You have affirmation. You start helping others, and your loss adjustment completes. And that is honoring your grief. That's what it can look like. Get ready for tomorrow. The Lion's Gate opens, which is a huge portal for recreating. It's a great time to get rid of old programming and move into some healing cycles and also moving out of that karmic energy. You're
listening to OTR FM, part of the IOM radio network.
Oh, I guess we're going to end there. So thanks so much. The promo's plenty. But thank you so much for hanging out today. This has been a fun show, just sharing with you on how to honor your grief. We'll be back next Wisdom Wednesday at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. Until our next soul adventure, be kind, be caring, be compassionate. Have a great week, everyone. Namaste.